Hello and welcome to Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, product of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. I am your usual host, Joe Healy, joined by my good friend and Highway to Hoover co-host, Mark Etheridge. He is here essentially to, not to dehumanize him, but he is essentially here to be a meat shield for the Field of 64 questions that you might throw our way during the show. So he's obviously a lot more equipped answer than I would be. So he is here to help us with that, and also because he and I have been spending all kinds of hours sitting next to each other in a press box in Hoover, Alabama, where we are losing weight in sweat just like you wouldn't believe. So nice steamy week in Hoover, but it is dry, and that's a trade-off that I will take every time. So let's get to we'll jump right in, Mark. News item off the top. So, Ole Miss gets eliminated first night of the tournament. Mike Bianco gets asked in post-game. Shout out to David Eckert of the Clarion Ledger. He asked the question, do you expect to be back next year? And he said, you'd have to ask my boss, but I expect to be back next year, which I think signaled to us that, hey, he's not retiring, or, he's not going to, or at the very least, he's not going to do the you know what, I've thought about this and it's time for me to go, just kind of the step aside thing. And then we got confirmation of that from a number of sources, including Chase Parham of Rebel Grove yesterday, Thursday, that Bianco will be back. And I think this is maybe the more interesting part, because I never saw Bianco leaving. I never really thought that was on the table. Maybe it was more closer to that than I really realized, because it's not like I'm as plugged in, obviously, as Chase in that situation. But I think the more interesting piece of that is that he is also going to hire another member of on-field staff, and we are assuming, though who knows, but we are assuming that is going to be a pitching coach. Bianco, because of his background as a catcher, because he's always worked with the pitchers, has long kind of been his own pitching coach. But obviously, things on the mound have not gone particularly well for Ole Miss the last couple of years. So perhaps, and this is the mark of a good coach. Like, every once in a while, you just have to kind of say, okay, look in the mirror and say, all right, what do we need? So I'll be interested to see who they end up with there. But Mark, your reaction to all that news we got yesterday and what have you?
Yeah, like you, it certainly wasn't a surprise. I think the bringing in some new energy, just some new ideas. I think that's a good thing for staff, especially for a coach who's been there as long as he has. Just kind of, shake it up. You don't want your program to get stale, okay? And bringing in some different ideas, different voice sometimes matters. Even you can say the same thing in a different way, and it resonates with players. So I think this is a positive thing for Ole Miss. And one thing I would say is, Ole Miss wasn't that far away from making the postseason. I mean, they get a break here or there, and then they're one of those 13 and 17 teams, that we've talked so much about this week. So, yeah, I know the season didn't go the way Ole Miss wanted it, but I think this is probably the right move, to maintain that, your program defining coach, but also give it a little new life, new blood with another voice.
Yeah, that's a great call. I mean, the point about sometimes it just takes a new voice, not a better voice necessarily, not to say that there can't be improvements, but it's just a new voice is the important part there, because I've used the example of Mississippi State this year, which undoubtedly their pitching is better than it has been. But I seriously doubt Scott Foxhall's message was, hey, let's kind of nibble around the corners and walk a bunch of guys and then give up big hits when we come in the strike zone. And I seriously doubt Justin Parker's message is simply just throw it right down the middle, guys. Just pump it down Main Street and just throw it past them. Like, obviously, their nuanced message. Both guys can be good pitching coaches, and it can just be that one guy was the right guy for right now, right? So yeah, that'll be something interesting to watch as we go into the off season. Obviously, Mark, we got a couple games today. We will, just a heads up as you're watching. Mark and I are going to take a look at the games today. We will get to your questions. I see some in there. I see some good ones already. We will get to those. We'll get through today's games, then I'll flip over and we'll take a look at the comments. We also have kind of a hard out here at the top of the hour. Mark and I, I'm going to be honest with you. We have a lunch to get to, and Mark and I have not had a meal outside of a ballpark this week. So we're pretty excited.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we have a fairly hard stop at the top of the hour. So there may be good questions left in the chat that we just don't get to. I'll apologize for that off the top. So, okay. Today's games, Mark, we're going to start off our first game of the day. That's 3:00 local, so 4 Eastern, 3 Central. Shout out to our West Coast fans. 1 p.m. on the West Coast. Kentucky and South Carolina, and Kentucky coming off an impressive performance against Arkansas. Arkansas really emptied their pitching staff. Every pit. So I did the math. 29 of their 30 SEC starts came from guys who pitched yesterday.
Yeah, that's good. Good note.
Yeah. So had they won that game, I don't know where they would have gone next. That would have been kind of fun to see, but Arkansas is eliminated. Kentucky moves on. And then against South Carolina today, Mark, I'll throw it to you with this. Just the fact that South Carolina is also kind of in a scrambling, I'll say scrambling, but they're going to have to find some guys today that maybe aren't among the guys who they lean on to get out. So they're going to have to go to some of those guys today. While Kentucky, I assume, I have not seen anything, I assume Kentucky will come with Mason Moore or someone of that ilk, right? They've just got a lot more guys ready to go. So that, to me, that reads advantage Kentucky, but obviously we'll have to see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kentucky's played one fewer game, and South Carolina with the way those games have gone. I mean, they've gone through quite a few of their top guys. So there's an opportunity, right? And we see this from time to time when a team makes a run. You get some guys who hadn't thrown a lot of innings, and maybe this is their moment, and could be a career-defining moment, right? Something that they tell the kids about. That, hey, I got this opportunity when, the season hadn't gone the way I wanted, and I just was awesome, right? For those, and maybe it's one batter, maybe it's 50, right? You just, you don't know. So I do think that South Carolina has certainly helped themselves this week. They're playing so much better. They, after losing those last 6 SEC games, to just kind of flush that, and that looks like a different team now. So they're going to enter regional play with momentum, and regardless of how today goes, and they could have very easily won the LSU game last night, and I expect they'll fight hard against Kentucky. Kentucky, and we know how Minge often does. He does not like to let the red hot hitter beat him. So it'll be interesting to see how he pitches Cole Messina, who is having, he's the tournament MVP at this point. And I put it in my story. I don't remember exactly how many RBIs he already has, but it's just an ungodly amount for 3 games. It's just so that'll be another fun thing. How does Kentucky deal with him? How can they cool him off? And then from a South Carolina standpoint, can they pitch enough to deal with that Kentucky lineup, because they can really swing it?
Yeah, and funny enough, South Carolina is going to have to deal with something similar when they try to pitch to Ryan Waldschmidt. He's having a good tournament as well. He had 2 home runs yesterday. Honestly, one of the best hitters in the SEC this season, full stop. And I heard from somebody yesterday that there's talk of Waldschmidt maybe being a first-round pick. Based on the way he's played this year, one of the best players in the SEC. Dude can run. He can play just about everywhere on the field.
It's a lot to like.
Yeah. If it weren't for the fact that Kentucky already has premium defenders at a lot of positions, he'd probably be playing center field or, maybe shortstop or third base. Right. So he's got pop, he can run, he can field. He's physical. He had dealt with a lot of injuries early in his Kentucky career, and now finally healthy, and he's really tearing it up. So kudos to him. Those 2 guys. I assume that Hoover Met is at risk of just going up into flames today based on just how hot Ryan Waldschmidt and Cole Messina are. That is certainly on the table. Our second game, Mark, which is a TBD start time. It's just basically, how long does that first game take? I would estimate, if you're just kind of guessing, we're looking at a little before 7 p.m. local. Would be kind of my guess on that, but obviously we'll see. That game is between Tennessee and Mississippi State. Mark, you were at the ballpark late last night for Mississippi State. Narrow loss to Vanderbilt. So and State fans, I already know you're in here, and I probably have already asked. I've not looked at the comments, but we'll save the whole like, what does this mean for Mississippi State thing from just an on-field perspective, though. What are your expectations for State, especially now that we've seen Steven pitch, we've seen Senja pitch. Like now they're in that position where it's like, okay, what else do we got, right? But what are your expectations for Mississippi State going into this one?
Yeah, I assume Pico Khan will go. He's been pitching some on the weekends. Hasn't thrown yet. I do think that probably more important than the wins and losses, and those are important for Mississippi State still, is getting Dakota Jordan going and getting Hunter Hines going, because neither one of those guys are playing to the levels that we've become accustomed to seeing, and that's, if Mississippi State's going to reach their goals and make it, return to the College World Series, they got to get going, and it needs to happen quickly. It's with the way Hisack has come on and had just a historic week. He hadn't had a ton of hits, but the ones he's had have been critical. And, he's hitting 3-hole now because those other guys are, kind of scuffling. So it'll be really interesting to see what Tennessee does with Drew Beam. I assume he will start. I don't know how long he will go. Tennessee has nothing to gain or lose with this, so they will not stretch him out, right? So it's, Mississippi State needs this game from a hosting standpoint. Tennessee really doesn't, but Tennessee's, they don't want to go home either. I mean, it's fun to play games. You want to continue to play them, and I think that because of that Tennessee certainly has the edge on paper, and with the pitching matchup. But if Beam's only throwing 50 pitches or whatever they decide to do, then it evens evens the scales a bit. So that to me is the most fascinating. I think with South Carolina and Kentucky, I mean, neither one has anything to really gain. South Carolina's in the field. They're probably a 2 seed, but they can't get to a 1. They can't host. Kentucky's their top 8 regardless. Probably the top overall seed. And with Tennessee, the same thing. They're top overall seed. Mississippi State's either a 2 or they're going to host. And a lot of that depends on not only what they do, but what their RPI does, because that's the reason they're not hosting now. They have more conference wins, if you consider Hoover, than Georgia does. But Georgia has that gaudy RPI where Mississippi State doesn't.
Dang it, I didn't realize I was muted. That happens so rarely. We're so good at that, Mark. But I was typing, and I didn't want the clickies to be in the background. I was trying to do a good thing, and I flubbed it. And now I've lost my. Oh, Mississippi State it's just one of the weirdest resumes from a hosting perspective that I think I've ever seen. Where it's like, if you'd have told me, hey, you've got a team that, what are they sitting on now? 18 SEC wins, including Hoover. 19.
Well, no, it would be, because they've won 2 in Hoover. They were 2-1 in Hoover, and they beat Ole Miss in midweek, so it'd be 20.
Oh, 20, yeah, 20-14 in SEC games. And if you told me like that before the season, absent of anything else, if you said, hey, we've got an SEC team that's 20-4 against conference competition, including Hoover, where are they? And I'm like, well, that's certainly a host, and it's probably a top 8. And yet, right? And this is, and it's not. It doesn't take like the nerd you don't have to be the Nerdmaster General Mark Etheridge to understand why. They dropped some games early in the year that first of all, they wouldn't drop now,
right,
but they did then. And that's just the old reminder that games on February 20th or whatever matter in terms of metrics just as much as the ones on May 20th.
It's a data point. Yeah.
Yep. So that'll be fascinating. You're right, because the RPI is the thing here. It's not the wins really, and how the committee views it, which we can't know, right? Like, is it possible they reach for State at 24 to host? Yeah, sure. It would be unprecedented, but like, is it possible? Yeah, in a realm of outcomes, sure. I mean, I can't imagine you disagree with that it's possible.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's we got about 15 minutes left here. Let's go over to some of the comments. Let's see what we can get through here, Mark. Again, I will apologize if we can't get to every last question here today. We've got a little bit of a cutoff point here, a couple minutes after the top of the hour. So Billy Derrick, who I know is a Vandy guy, covers the team there. Hi, Billy. Good to see you this morning. He says, does this SEC tournament run change your opinion on what Vandy can do in the NCAA tournament? I will start because Mark just did a whole lot of talking, so I will give him a rest there. I think, well, I would say no, because I always thought that Vanderbilt had more potential in the NCAA tournament than what their regular season record showed. So I would say that I was already optimistic that, like, yeah, this is a 2 seed you probably don't want to see, right? I mean, they're supremely talented. And in an environment, I mean, that they're really hitting the ball well right now. And there are a lot of environments they'll go to that are going to be more offensive than the ballpark they play in. And I can guarantee in regionals, it's going to be warm and the ball is going to be flying everywhere. Like that it really almost doesn't matter where they get sent. So unless it's Corvallis, that might be the one outlier. But or Santa Barbara, I guess, maybe plays a little bit bigger. But so I would say no, but that's not a slight on Vanderbilt, Billy. I think it's more like I was fairly optimistic about it. Now I will say the one variable here is we've not yet seen Carter Holton. There is a lot of mystery about him, given that his last start didn't go well, and he was visited by a trainer in that start and was promptly removed a couple batters after that trainer visit. So his status feels a little bit up in the air. So that is something that you don't like from that standpoint, because it seems like their best path in a regional is, hey, just, Cunningham basically throws it like he did earlier this week, and then Carter Holton's really good, and then Vanderbilt's sitting 2-0 and can piece it together. So you don't like that, but yeah, the way they're playing here is not a huge shock to me. Also, they tend to play well in this event, like that's a thing. So Billy, I think they're a better team than what the regular season stuff has shown, and so I've got a level of optimism that necessarily hasn't changed here, Mark. But what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, J.D. Thompson's pitching really well, and with Futrell, you have somebody that that you can trust. I do think that if Holton returns, then all of a sudden I like Vandy's chances a whole lot more. But offensively, they've swung it as good as they have, in maybe all year. That is certainly considering the competition. I mean, they're really offensive this week, and that's not something I really expected. So yeah. To answer your question, I do feel different about Vanderbilt, especially if Holton's available next week, and he's the Holton that you want.
Yeah. These aren't necessarily questions, but they are kind of funny, and we can just comment quickly on them. We'll move on. Visa V16 on YouTube says, morning, guys. Not happy with the errors for my Hogs, but pretty happy they're at home resting instead of in the heat. I think it's pretty telling the top seeds all lost the first night. And then relatedly, Tanner Harris on YouTube says, Arkansas completed their mission of going 0-2 in Hoover and having no injuries. Yeah. I mean, the way they played, not in terms of the quality, although there was the errors, but in terms of they used a bunch of starters yesterday. Like it was pretty clear that they were emphasizing, let's get everything ready for regionals versus let's try to win some games here. And by the way, a spoiler alert, I've got a piece coming out today on how the new format, I think, will eliminate some of that. We'll keep coaches from having to make that stark a choice during the tournament, which I think is good for everyone involved. So I'll have a piece on that. So look out for that. But like clearly Arkansas emphasized getting ready for regionals, and it's hard to blame them. I mean, they didn't have anything to gain here, and so they're out pretty quick, and no big surprise there for me just based on that fact.
Yeah, I would agree. It's certainly they had nothing to gain, nothing to lose, so being able to just go out and get guys work. I mean, Hagen Smith threw 2 innings. I mean, if you really wanted to win this, he's going much deeper, and then you piece it together from there. And I think that Arkansas, the only concern I have there is just, are they going to hit enough? And we've been talking about this all year. Some weeks they look really, really good offensively, and you have no concern, and then other weeks you kind of wonder. And I think that's what will next week, really the next 2 weeks, assuming they win next week, are they going to be offensive enough? And there's no way to know. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, there are some 2 seeds out there that have the pitching, but if nothing else, they're not going to, in regionals be facing SEC pitching. And the odds are that's going to be a good thing. Okay, Sean Miller on YouTube, Xavier basketball coach Sean Miller. So he says, okay, so 11 teams for the SEC virtually a lock now. Is Florida the most nervous between now and Monday? I would say Florida, yes, the most nervous, right? I mean, that seems obvious. But Mark, are you? I've said this on radio. Are you with me that 11 seems like almost a certainty?
Well, unless we get just a rash of stolen bids, I agree. I think, I mean, or I guess it would have been early this morning, around 2 a.m.
Way too early.
Yeah, Kendall, Aaron, and I were meeting to really talk about the bubble and the final host, the final bubble teams. And I didn't have Florida in my last 4. So, if we have, just a whole bunch of stolen bids, you look in the Big Ten, you look in Miami could potentially take one in the ACC. East Carolina already has a loss in the AAC. Indiana State has a loss in the Missouri Valley. If none of those, if you get a carnage scenario, then yeah, maybe Florida's in trouble. But barring that, I think Florida's in, and the SEC gets a record 11 bids. And it kind of sets up, because as these conferences get bigger, you're going to get more and more, because you have 16 SEC teams next year. I will be surprised if it's not at least 11 next year. Maybe some years there'll be 12.
So a couple things here. Jeremy Scott says Roll Tide. Alabama should be in a regional. They seem like they're in good shape for that, Jeremy. Sean says, we talked about entering regionals with momentum, but in the recent past, it seems like momentum actually results in being tired and doesn't result in success in the regional. We saw this with Vanderbilt last year. The issue is that I would agree with your sentiment, Sean. It's just, it's so hard to know, right? Like we can never know if a deep run in Hoover, or pick your conference tournament, is, hey, we're playing well, so we're feeling good, and we're, or good God, we just spent 6 straight days in 90-degree heat standing out on the field and we're just wiped, right? Yeah. We just can't know that. But I'm with you, Sean. Like, there definitely is some level of, like, sometimes you can be there too long. But we won't know that until we see them in regionals. And even then, like maybe they just played bad, right?
Right.
There's a whole lot of factors we can't tell.
And I think you can gain momentum without winning the whole thing.
Yeah.
Without making it to Sunday. And like in the case of Vanderbilt, South Carolina, LSU, even if they don't win it, even if they lose Saturday, or South Carolina's case today, it's been a good week for them, just kind of, turning things around. And I think that's that's more important, because you want to be feeling good about yourself, and having baseball is so much about confidence. So being able to have that, that excitement heading in, instead of, oh boy, what are we going to do now? We blew this other game, and we blew this game, and just that overall positivity with the program. I think that part matters. But I agree. I mean, if you use up all your pitchers and your players are exhausted, that can certainly impact you negatively.
Yeah, especially if you're going to be a 2 seed, it means you have to travel somewhere, right? Like that's just an extra thing. All right, we'll blow through a couple of these quickly. Expo SS on YouTube says, my Vols need to lay an egg and get home in the AC and rest. Yeah, you might get your wish today. Real quick, Mark, I'm going to limit you to about like 30 seconds on this one. Take less if you'd like. Okay. Scott Hankoski on Facebook says, could LSU host if they win the tourney?
They're too far to climb. I mean, they came in with 13 conference wins. 15 is the least anyone's ever had, and that was when Florida made it all the way to Sunday in the tournament. Plus they had an RPI that was like 10 or 12, something like that. So it was just too big a hole to climb out of. But LSU's played their way to a 2 seed, which is, considering entered the week on the bubble, you'll take it.
Good work, Mark. That was nice. And Schulke on YouTube, a frequent commenter on Weekend Waypoints. Appreciate Ann all season. She's predicting Hines and Jordan bust out today. She's also saying, thank goodness today's a project day in class, as this fan is a little tired. Can confirm Mark and Joe. And I wasn't even at the ballpark late. We are also a little tired, but hey, you know what? We're having a lot of fun, so we're not complaining. But yeah, I mean, Hines and Jordan are going to bust out. It's just a matter of A, is it today or next weekend? And B, can Mississippi State keep it going with other guys long enough for it to matter, right? That's the thing. I mean, you're not going to keep those hitters down for long. So yeah, I think Ann, you are in good company probably in predicting that they get things together before they leave Hoover. Jordan Shields, YouTube, who do y'all think State throws tonight, and what do they have left bullpen wise? Mark, you mentioned earlier Pico Cone as a potential starter. That sounds about right to me. That sounds like a good option. And bullpen wise, like, you probably don't mess around with Nate Dome just because he's coming back from the arm stuff and being unhealthy. But like anybody who threw in the first two games, yeah. I think is probably in play because State has things to play for in a way that a lot of teams don't here. So, I don't think they're going to do anything silly because they are in a regional now. Their season will continue. But I would be surprised if they do anything super silly, but I do think they are going to push the gas a little bit to get this game.
Yeah, and I do think you'll see some guys who haven't thrown yet, pitchers, that have had roles throughout the year but really weren't part of it in the last couple weeks. This is their moment, like we talked about earlier. This is an opportunity. Somebody can come through and carve for 3 or 4 innings, and then they'll have a role in the postseason. So that's what you look for. You look for the heroes to step up this time of year.
David Beatty on Facebook says Southern Miss needs to give a stolen bid. That would be nice of them.
Yeah, generous.
The Infinity on YouTube. This is not an SEC question, but I'll allow it. But it does mean, Mark, you're going to give just like a kind of like a yes or no plus a sentence answer. Y'all think UNCW is going to make it if they don't win the conference tournament?
They're right on that bubble, just like what we talked about with, when we discussed Florida. I've got Wilmington just behind Florida, but they're basically bracketed. They're really close. So watch the scoreboards. It's stolen bids. That's the biggest challenge for Wilmington and Charleston, who are both kind of in that similar spot in the CAA.
2 more questions here, and then we'll get out of here. Tanner Harris on YouTube. Does the committee look at Florida's overall record, and what are the chances they're in? We've kind of talked about their chances there, Tanner. Mark said they weren't among the last 4 in, but they're obviously precarious if they're stolen bids. I would say too, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, Mark, the committee does look at overall record. It is a data point. It is not the primary data point or probably even one of the more major data points, but it is a data point. But here's my prediction. If they don't get in for whatever reason, we get a rash of stolen bids, whatever, I do think that will be among the things out of when we jump on the committee chair call, that will be among the reasons given why. Because I do think it is, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, but it is an easy thing to point to if you're on the committee to say like, well, look, you're 1 game above 500. Like you should have won more non-conference games. And honestly, it's hard to argue. So it just kind of is what it is.
Yeah, Florida has an odd resume. I mean, they've got tremendous number of high-end wins. They have more wins against the 1 and 2 seeds in our projected field than any SEC team. And here they are on the bubble. And the reason they're on the bubble is they lost to teams that they really shouldn't have lost to, right? And they struggled in midweek. It was well documented. And then, they're in that cluster of teams that finished 13 and 17 in the SEC. If there were 3 of those instead of 5, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. Florida would be in. So I think they'll get in anyway, but it is kind of, a wait and see week for them where, Florida's had so many years where they were, slam dunk. You were going to host, you were going to be a top 8, and this just ain't one of them.
There's a question here. Does Kentucky have anything to gain or lose the rest of the SEC tournament? No. Tanner. There we go. No, I mean, theoretically, they're fighting for the number 1 overall seed, but functionally, there's no difference between the 1 and the 2. It's just who you play in Hoover or in Omaha. And if you're in Omaha, honestly, you don't care.
You got to beat everybody anyway.
So. Right, exactly. And then the last question, Jeremy Scott asked, will they have the safety base for the NCAA tournament? I don't think so, Jeremy, just because, so with anything with the NCAA tournament, that has to go through a different type of process to get changes to the actual competition in the NCAA tournament. It's like a little more bureaucracy involved in that.
Yeah.
So no, but if you ask me 5 years from now, do we have it? I'd probably say yes.
I think it's went well this week.
Yeah, like
I
I
didn't
haven't
know,
noticed it, which is the
right?
best thing that I
Yeah,
could say.
right. I didn't really know how I would, or how it would be received, but you kind of forget about it after that initial shock of, hey, what's this green looking thing out there?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been fine. I'd be fine with them keeping it.
Yeah. Yeah, and because it's green, it actually does kind of blend in with this field. So, like, honestly, you don't always notice it. But yeah, we've had no collisions at first base. We've had no runners interference calls, which that might have been the case anyway. But it's been nice. It's been nice to not have it, to just not have those things, and to have it there. And I think it'll be a thing that we see grow, not shrink, in terms of how it gets used. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints, production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. Still plenty of content coming from the SEC tournament. Make sure you're following me, Mark, and Kendall Rogers. I hope if you're watching this, you already are, but we will be, Mark and Kendall will be there through today. I will be here for the duration. So follow us for SEC tournament stuff. We've got a whole bunch of pieces up on the website right now. Some of them are game specific, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them are big picture stuff. So that we're trying to kind of balance that, right? I've got more stuff going up today. I'm sure Mark and I will both have stuff going up from the games today. So plenty to read over there. If you're not a subscriber, this is the time of year to do it. Obviously, the postseason around the corner. Use the code 24season at checkout to get 24% off your annual SEC Extra subscription. I will be back. Mark, not so much, because Mark is traveling back home tomorrow. But I will be back tomorrow with the Saturday edition of Weekend Waypoints, talking about the semifinal matchups, which will be set at that point. So I will talk to you guys then. Mark and I will be back with a Highway to Hoover at some point this week, but TBD on when exactly that is. But whenever that is, we will talk to y'all soon.